Thank you for downloading this Real Agriculture podcast. Next thing you know the next thing. Next is Now is a short podcast discussing agriculture's emerging next-gen tech and trends as they're happening in our industry. Next is Now, presented by GFL Ag. Listen where you get your podcasts today.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Hepner. We are at the 2024 Crops Convention in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and pleased to be joined now by one of the featured speakers. Emily Rees is the president and CEO of CropLife International. And Emily, before getting to some of the questions that I have here, you're based in Brussels, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm based in Brussels. That's where CropLife International's headquarters are. And it's a pleasure to be here in Winnipeg today. It's chilly, but we've had a very warm welcome.
All right. Good to hear. Wanted to ask you about some of the trends we're seeing when it comes to technology and agriculture, including in your backyard in Europe. The pendulum for many years has been on one side of the, I'd say, the spectrum when it comes to opposition to technology, genetic modification, and different technologies in our food system. Are we seeing that pendulum come back the other way at this point maybe in Europe, or maybe it's a global trend? Would you say there's evidence of that happening at this point?
Well, with the advent of climate shocks, biodiversity loss, we see an embrace of technology in a new way, because to gain the productivity that's required to feed the world, to do so competitively, also without encroaching on native vegetation, by protecting conservation areas, for instance, well, we need to have more productivity in the areas that we have in agricultural use. And so what we're seeing is a new, I would say, a wind of debate happening as to the contributions of technologies, of biotechnologies, but also new genomic techniques to provide those answers. It can be drought tolerance, for instance. It can be a number of advantages that these new breeding techniques bring to the table in the light of those big global challenges. So in Europe, we've also had the vote, recent vote in the European Parliament, a favorable vote on new genomic techniques. This is really, again, an understanding that science works on the side of farmers, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's really the gene editing, the new genomic techniques that you're talking about. That's what's driving a lot of this. Policymakers are having to make decisions and consider the pros and cons of this technology.
Well, what we're seeing is a new embrace of innovation and technology in the agricultural discussion, right? And I don't think this is particular to Europe. I go and travel around the world. I have that opportunity. I meet with farmers and policymakers throughout continents. We're seeing this new trend, I would say, in opening the discussions on the role that these technologies and innovations play. Also, once again, to mitigate emissions, but also to adapt to this heating climate.
Yeah, and rising food prices, of course, have been a major topic of discussion all around the world over the last few years as well.
Yeah, so the question of food security, but not only food security in its principal way, but also looking at affordability of nutritious foods to populations worldwide. As we're seeing more shocks, we saw it with COVID, we're seeing it with conflicts and tensions, also some of the choke points that we mentioned earlier today in some of the areas of the world. What we're seeing is a new understanding of the role of agriculture in providing nutritious, affordable, and safe diets for populations worldwide. And also, again, with climatic shocks, the tensions that can arise around getting that affordable food to people worldwide.
Mm-hmm. You were at the WTO's ministerial conference last week in Abu Dhabi. How did this type of topic fit into the conversation that you heard and witnessed when you were at the ministerial meeting there?
So there was a lot of conversations around agriculture in Abu Dhabi at the MC30, and unfortunately it didn't result in any big package. We didn't see the type of breakthrough that I think is needed now at the World Trade Organization. But we certainly had a lot of conversations around agriculture there. We looked at the trade barriers in particular that impede food security, that really are barriers that don't, that basically impede food and feed to be distributed around the world, and do so under the rules-based trading system in a fair and equitable and transparent way.
At the same time, in your own country and many countries in Europe right now, we have tractors in the streets and farmers concerned about foods raised in other countries coming into their countries. Can you shed a bit of light on what's driving the protests that we're seeing from afar here in North America?
Yeah, I mean, the protests that we're seeing in Europe, but not only in Europe, worldwide, are generally stimulated from a question of competitiveness, right? So it's a request to level the playing field, and doing so because with any kind of restricted toolbox to farmers, they're losing competitiveness. And so pointing to the outside world, pointing to imports is a response to that. It's an unfortunate protectionist response, but you know, it's certainly something that we're seeing trending worldwide. Yeah.
And it's interesting that the movement is along the lines of, if we can't use these tools, then we shouldn't import food that uses those from countries where they can use those tools, rather than the inverse, where farmers have given up on being able to access those tools in their country. That's why they're asking for this. But it's just an interesting observation, I guess, that it seems farmers, like you said, it's a protectionist bent to it. It's not about accessing those tools that other countries have in their own country.
Well, when farmers' competitiveness is under threat, what they're asking for is for protection, right? Which is the basis when we're talking about protectionism. What is unfortunate is a call for mirror clauses. So this is basically that all imports should be produced under the exact same process and production methods as one's own. And that's not what the global rule book says to us. It says that if food is safe and respects the regulations of the importing country, then it should be allowed in. This is really a different conversation. I think it's a hard one when it comes to trade, because it can be trade restrictive on the imports of countries. So I think, once again, it's really important to put the rules book at the center of the table, and that's where the World Trade Organization plays its role.
Or at least it should.
Well, it still does, but I think here what we're seeing is that as the World Trade Organization, or the members, because it's the members of the World Trade Organization, are seeking, are not managing to have those breakthroughs on agriculture, you're going to have more and more policymakers calling for unilateral measures, which unfortunately then have impact on farmers elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. It just seems right now the enforcement part of the WTO and having that rule book might be at the center of the table, but the referee is missing in some of these situations right now.
So it's true that the appellate body is currently dysfunctional at the World Trade Organization. There was a lot of conversation around the reform of that last week in Abu Dhabi, but Canada has provided a lot of leadership on these issues. So by convening the Ottawa group that formed the basis of the multi-party interim arrangement, it's an arbitration system that is there to replace this appellate body and the dispute settlement system of the World Trade Organization until it can get fixed. There is recourse possible, and so we do have options if trade is being restricted in a discriminatory way.
Okay. To bring this conversation full circle then, Emily, when it comes to Canada's role in the world, when it comes to technology and our food supply and food security, Where do you see Canada fitting into the picture from your international perspective?
So Canada really has always played a strong convening role worldwide, right? A strong country that believes in multilateralism, that believes in the rules-based trading system. And I think now with a certain vacuum in leadership worldwide, there really is an opportunity here for Canada to step up in terms of having that leadership role. We just mentioned the multi-party interim arbitration system. That's an example of Canada really not only convening, but stepping up to propose solutions. And that's where I think Canada really has a role to play.
All right. What about in terms of increasing productivity in agriculture and tools that enhance productivity along those lines?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're looking at the type of leadership that Canada can play, for instance, in the biotech space, in speaking to other countries that are either embarking on the journey or are looking to speed up import requirements and others, then Canada plays a strong role. And that's where Canadian negotiators, I'm sure, are firm at the job, but encouragement from the farming community is always very much welcome.
All right. Well, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your stay here in Western Canada, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you.